The time had just come when I had been pushed as far as I could stand to be pushed, I suppose.
Hello, hello.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Sarah, and we're super grateful to be here with you today. And to get a transcript of this, we want to make sure this is as successful and accessible as possible. And so go to the bottom of your screen and you can click where it says live transcript with the closed caption button. You might have to click more, and under the more with 3 dots, just look for the option to show subtitle. You'll also be able to chat with folks during this time. And so if you can go to your chat and click everyone, then you'll be able to chat in and say hello in a couple of minutes. So hopefully that's enabled. And if not, we're just really grateful that you're here via this webinar and everyone on Facebook Live as well. So thank you for joining us. We also want to thank Jason Boone for this idea for this series, Stir Up Peace, that when he was working with Mennonite Mission Network, Peace and Justice Support Network. And we're also really grateful to Mennonite Mission Network's team who did the hard work of editing these videos, and especially the artwork and animation by David Fast, and the study guide materials that we wrote. They were edited all by the communications team. So this was a joy to have a chance to work with you all.
We are so grateful for that. And before going any further, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on stolen Indigenous land. Nearly all of the Americas fit into this description. Sarah and I are calling in tonight from unceded Onondaga Nation land in Syracuse, New York. If you know the name of the traditional stewards of the land that you are zooming in from, please write them in the chat as we continue this acknowledgement. If you are new to Zoom, the chat dialog box is at the bottom of that same panel that Sarah was referring to earlier.
And I've just dropped in the chat a way to find out whose land you're on, and perhaps you're an Indigenous person calling in from your own unceded territory. Thanks, Jill, for getting us started and sharing that, and great. And because we're doing this online, it can feel like we're floating a little bit, but just want to acknowledge that the servers, big internet servers, all also sit on Indigenous land, and that's millions of acres in Nevada, Utah, and Virginia. For those of us on Turtle Island, see some people who are coming in internationally as well. And furthermore, just as we gather, we just want to recognize what it takes, the intensity it takes to produce these computers and phones that we're all using. So I want to particularly recognize the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a country at the heart of the African continent, where many of these minerals come from. So I want to acknowledge that place and peoples and ecosystem. And furthermore, I want to recognize the labor that many of us have done and has been done for us in order to be able to be present for this session. So may all we do be for healing and repair and a blessing to Earth and its beings this evening.
And as we're going to be talking about nonviolent direct action tonight, we recognize that we do the work of training for nonviolent direct action in many different contexts. So if something that we say doesn't quite land well with you, we invite you to examine why that might be the case, and simply to take what serves you, your congregation, and your community. The different watersheds and regions that form us demand different things of our discipleship for those places. We're so grateful that you chose to be with us today and that we can learn together.
Awesome. So we want to know a little bit more about who is here, and thank you all for sharing where you are in the chat. But I would love to know what congregations you are calling from or affinity groups. And we use the term affinity groups in the video as well. These are people who you are really close to that you can take that collective and direct action with together. And that may be the people who are studying this video series with you, Stir Up Peace, or it may be another group that you organize with. So yeah, if you have a congregation that you're a part of, or people you've been studying this video series with, great. Thank you. And you all can see here in the chat, those of you who are on Zoom can see that where others are who are Zooming in tonight. This is really great. Welcome, welcome. I want to know a little bit more too. So for some of you, this might be the first time you've encountered nonviolent direct action work, but for some of you who have been here for a while, would love to know, what do you remember? So think of the date maybe that you first recognized the importance of nonviolent direct action. It might have been in 2003 when the US invaded Iraq. Maybe that's a time that woke you. Maybe it was 2016. Maybe it was 2020. Let's throw some years here in the chat to get the range of when people remember first waking up to the power of nonviolence. 1960s are represented here. 1965. These are marking pivotal moments, at least in the United States and worldwide. The year 1968 has a lot of significance for massive uprisings and civil disobedience that helped to create many of the reforms that are actually getting rolled back today, but that we worked on. 1981, 1984, learning about apartheid South Africa. 2010. This is beautiful. Thank you for coming and sticking with it since that time. 1973, when my chores were not fair related to my brothers. And 1981, the wars in Central America. 1965. Thank you.
Whoever you are and wherever you come from, we want to say welcome. Now, more than ever, we need to find ways to deal with social issues and injustices nonviolently. These past weeks have been weeks full of grief. So much grief. We wrote this curriculum to help you and your community show up in public in a helpful, effective, and disciplined way, full of compassion and strategy. So thanks for being co-conspirators together tonight.
Although we're in webinar mode, I'm going to invite you to do one embodied activity, because all of the videos and the study guide lead us towards embodying nonviolence. So I would like to invite onto the screen the other hosts that are with us, and I would like to invite everyone to put your hands up visibly towards your screen. So I want to invite up Lee Penner, who's a network and systems admin, and Joni Miller, who's director of training and resources, and Casey Detweiler, who's in the videos, and also the division coordinator for advancement. So we're all here together, and we invite you to do this with us. I'll instruct you the whole way through. As you exhale, close your hands in loose fists at your own pace, matching your breath. As you inhale, open your hands. Connect with your breath. Notice if it's shallow or deep. No judgment, just connect with it. Breath in many languages is the same word as spirit. And so those who breathe together, co-conspirators. So even across these interwebs, we can conspire for peace together. Keep breathing. And now I invite you to find one of the people on the screen here and simply match your breathing with theirs. Thank you. We're gathered together as a group in this constellation who will likely never again be in this specific constellation. So it's a special moment. So thank you for breathing life into it together.
And in a moment, we will show a little excerpt from the video series that we all created. This webinar is designed specifically to promote the usage of this curriculum and these videos and to answer questions that you might have about using them. Though we can do some nonviolent direct action, or NVDA, as we'll sometimes refer to it, using some insider language. Though we can do those kind of trainings online, today our focus is specifically using the curriculum. If you all go through the curriculum and end up wanting a nonviolent direct action training for a specific campaign or public witness, we are here for you. We would love to join your community and help do a training or point you in the direction of others that are willing and ready to do trainings as well. This video series is really designed to help congregations and communities take the next step in that direction. But let's take this one step at a time. Put questions that you have in the Q&A, and we will begin collecting them for the last 15 minutes. In the video that we're queuing up, you will hear a variety of things, some nonviolent direct action theory. You'll hear a Christian grounding for nonviolence, a real-life example of a campaign, some tactics that were used in it, and a call to action. You'll also get to see Sarah when she had longer hair. We fit a lot into these videos, so we wanted to share just one tonight that encapsulates a little bit of what we were going for in the series. Hope you enjoy.
Yes, it may look bleak, but there's hope.
As we work for peace, conflicts are inevitable. Nonviolence is not a way of avoiding conflict, but confronting it skillfully. Jesus commanded his followers to love their enemies. He knew we would have enemies, or people who oppose our work for peace. And when we confront them, our intervention will cause conflict. And it's not just people who you will come in conflict with. Systems, structures, and institutions that cause harm become our opponents too. But waging conflict through nonviolent direct action is different from violent conflict. Violence seeks to eliminate opponents who can't be won over. Christian nonviolence sees every person as made in the image of God. We believe in the possibility of change and repentance for all, including ourselves. So we refuse to kill enemies or use violence against opponents, no matter how just our cause. The story of Lema Bowie and the Liberian Women's Mass Action for Peace campaign is a great example of the power of nonviolent direct action. Through vigils, interfaith witness, marches, and sit-ins, the small group began a society-wide conversation about stopping the Second Liberian Civil War. The women did not destroy or dehumanize their opponents in violent acts, but they did expose the warring parties to the hurt they were causing. And this caused the necessary conflict with the men in power. If the demands for peace were not met, the women made plans to nonviolently escalate the conflict. Through this grueling nonviolent direct action campaign, the men eventually put down their guns and the voice of the people was heard, resulting in an end to the Civil War. It takes boldness to confront those who cause harm. It may be uncomfortable, the odds may seem overwhelming. However, nonviolent direct action is a time-tested way to create healing and new beginnings.
So that video helped explain kind of all of the parts of what we hope the audiences would get out of this series. We designed this video series and curriculum for groups to study together, to build their understanding and motivation to participate in real life actions. The series as a whole has a lot packed in. It covers the Christian groundings for nonviolence, the theory behind nonviolent direct action, stories about those who have put nonviolence in action successfully in the past, important practical considerations when creating a campaign, and we hope inspiring calls to action for the audience to use these creative nonviolent tactics to challenge oppression.
So here is another opportunity to write in the chat. What campaigns can you imagine using your faith-based nonviolence commitments for? So feel free to type answers in the chat. That may be what you can imagine your group doing, or just your wildest imagination. What types of oppressions do you wish to challenge and that you can imagine using nonviolent direct action for? We'll give you a little bit of time to type in the chat. And yes, that was episode 8 that we just showed. And then we'll converse a little bit about some of the campaigns that you all suggest. Here comes some, and we'll read them off in just a little bit of time. Great. And as you think about this, try to be as specific as possible. That is one aspect of a campaign that's really important. So for the contribution that notes that prejudice is an issue, get more specific about ways, like what types of prejudice and what's happening, so that you are able to tune your actions towards a really specific goal and have success. Okay. Just another minute or two. For those on Facebook Live, I'll start reading them out loud, but you all can continue to write some. Dismantling the policing and border patrol systems, protecting sacred land. Prejudice, we spoke about this a little bit earlier. I'm going to try to get even more specific there. Transforming the cash bail system. Assault weapons in the United States. Protecting Oak Flat, a sacred site to the Apache peoples. Housing. Housing injustice, I would imagine. Yeah, and the lack of affordable housing. Freezing all economic activity for 1 hour per week increasing incrementally until serious action on climate catastrophe is committed and confirmed by governments at every level. So in this answer, you already have an idea of what to do and how to do it and what you would like to see because it relates to climate catastrophe. Closing Baker Detention Center in Florida. And decreasing the tension in our community between those who are Republican and those who are Democrat. Local Christian community resistance to racial justice work. Not allowing Black people to rent. This is probably in housing as well. Making the Tucson, Arizona police not collaborate with immigration enforcement. So already there's a very specific, see, immigration justice is a broad issue, but this way you have a very specific thing you can work on because it's everything you do can make a difference because everything is connected in a system. And someone from Facebook Live has shared to address gun violence in this country and saving our kids at schools. Very timely issue and has been timely since for a long time now. Housing for the underhoused. A rapid response team for peaceful presence during escalating protests. Another person from Facebook, supporting the LGBTQ community since we are supposed to be an inclusive church. Bullying in schools. And Islamic gangs targeting and killing Christians in Kandua province and others in Nigeria. Mandates dealing with specific actions in response to medical or mental health problems, for example, vaccination. And recognizing mental health as health in budgeting. Thank you all for sharing these issues. I think it's important to let one another know what the concerns in our communities and on our hearts are. Just speaking them and writing them is like the first step in mobilizing. Because there can be no awareness and action if an issue is not understood or even named. We talked a little bit about that in video 6 or 7. Yeah. So we want to just speak a little bit to some of these and think about the points of intervention, video 4, that we might suggest for these different ones. Jonathan, I've been reading them. Do you have a sense of one that you are ready to speak about, or should I just go ahead?
You pick, and then we'll work on it together.
Sounds good. Cool. Well, I mean, all these issues are really important. And again, they don't compete with one another in the sense that if you skill up to do nonviolent direct action, you can invite and have a big coalition that can work with each other and support each other on many things. So housing and justice is not separate from issues of gun violence, is not separate from issues of extraction in Oak Flat, is not separate from immigration justice. And so they're all connected. So even as I'm gonna pick gun violence. It's right here in the middle of my chat, and it's on so many of our hearts and minds right now. There's also heavy resistance to making changes on the political levels to address this issue. Many people, individuals, are ready to make changes. Why haven't we seen change then? And what do we need to do in order to promote change at societal level? Again, this is where nonviolent direct action shines its best so far on the societal level. Though you can have non-governmental or nonprofit targets in trying to influence change. So some people have made direct interventions at the National Rifle Association meeting, for example, or at gun shows, for example. So thinking about gun violence, think about the policies that allow for weapons to be bought and sold. And so you can make an intervention, for example, at a gun making factory. Right there, that's the point of production of those guns. Perhaps it means blocking the entrance to work for workers while also talking to those workers about what other jobs are available in the area. That's often a concern of people. If I don't work here, where else can I work? So you as an activist in your community would need to be ready to say, if you quit today, here's how we'll take care of you and your community.
You could also do it at the point of consumption, places where people are buying guns. So at gun shops or at stores or at these large arms dealerships, protesting outside of those, calling for the people not to go in, or for the people who are selling the guns to do more background checks, for example.
Let's see. What I think we learned from March for Our Lives as students walked out of their schools because school wasn't a safe place for them and took their calls to Washington. There was a place that many connections were made from youth across the country. And although they were not able to get legislation passed on everything they wanted to see, many of those youth have now created connections between each other that were never there, such as the youth of the school in Florida connecting with the youth and students in Detroit. And they still work together today. And I believe that the coalition to end gun violence is stronger for it. So in the process of starting March for Our Lives, where they intervened at a point of assumption, which is their school, and then took their demands to Washington, which is the point of decision on this issue, we're able to make a difference.
And I also think about symbolic actions that people do around gun violence. I think about the work of Raw Tools that are literally changing guns into gardening tools, which is a specific action for churches, calling on Christians to remember the words of Scripture, that guns should be turned into plowshares, and to stop worshiping guns. So this is an action that is in a place of worship that is looking at an audience of Christians specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's connected to the question of policing, which is connected to the question of military. And so on a smaller scale, churches and other communities and households are deciding together what other actions they can take besides calling the police, because that is calling in a force that uses the threat of violence or violence via a gun often itself in order to, quote, resolve a conflict. And so the work that happens when you do nonviolent direct actions, you get to meet a lot of people who are thinking together about what the world can be like. And I remember marching with people who were actively talking about how they could not call the cops if they were afraid. And so they thought about how they might, instead of walking alone at dusk, they may call a friend to either come pick them up or a couple of friends to come walk with them, because if they're part of a group, they're less vulnerable and they have joyful conversations along the way. And therefore, they're less reliant on the lethal force of the state. And they're less reliant on people who say, you can be safe, just carry a gun in your purse. They're saying no to that. And so they recognized that the United States adherence to guns has so much to do with this massive question of fear of the other. And so they need to tackle that as well. So as you do nonviolent direct action, your own life will continue to be disrupted and transformed. But this is part of why we feel like it is a faithful way to be in the world. It's gutsy, it's risky, it's sometimes annoying to the powers that be and others. But hey, Jesus also annoyed the powers that be and others, and just said, come and see what can happen as we do this work together. So thank you for the person who dropped in the chat that the March for Our Lives group has a call to action. So go ahead and click on that and pull it up in another box right after you get off this webinar. Go to marchforourlives.com/March22, and we can help them by taking action and signing that petition. That's one thing I want to see. I also have I want to talk about housing. Is there another one they want to get into?
We can do housing. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Great. I just want to tell a story about housing for the underhoused.
Just before we transition to that, what Sarah and I just did, we went through some of the different points where you could intervene on the issue of gun violence, right? Where the guns are being produced, where they're being bought, where the assumptions are happening, where the decisions are happening. This is one of the practices that we offer in the video series. Also, we talked a little bit about the various audiences that you might be able to reach through different actions. And we have a whole video just on audiences. It's video 5. So we're practicing a little bit of what we preach in the videos.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So one nonviolent direct action happened in the Bay Area of the United States, which is West Coast, kind of mid-California. And there's a severe housing crisis that is generated by large tech companies and the high salaries of some individuals and the gentrification of neighborhoods and pushing individuals who live there for a long time out. At the same time, there's a lot of vacant housing. So developers are buying up a lot of land, and there's so much wealth in the 1% that they don't know where to put their money. So they put it in housing, and then the prices get all messed up for folks. But there's still vacant houses and there's still unhoused people. So this group called Moms for Housing and a number of Mennonite churches, like also allied with them, they went directly to a vacant home and began to live in it. They were all moms that did this together, shining a spotlight on particularly the housing precarity for people with young children. Not only were the moms living in the household, but others accompanied them day by day outside of that home to make sure that when the police came to evict those people because they were trespassing, that there would be witnesses to what happened, and there would be an opportunity to talk about why they were committing this civil disobedience, that is, violating the sacrosanct property laws in the United States, in order to make sure that housing could be considered a human right and was visibilized as such. So the direct action that they took. And we can connect you with the people who worked on that. If you're thinking, hey, that might work for the unhoused population where I am in my church, right? So this is about networking and connections as well. And the videos give a way that people can be all at a similar foundation level and understand the various concepts and the various discipline required to carry out the arc of a campaign. So that was one thought I had about the housing issue. Yeah.
Now, I'll just give one really brief example. We had some people here talking about immigration enforcement, and I know a number of Mennonite churches who we have helped do nonviolent direct action trainings for because they wanted to be able to support people through sanctuary. This is something that churches have been for a long time. It's deep in our history to provide sanctuary for those who are under threat. And in this case, with people who are undocumented, if they stayed in a church, they were generally safe from ICE, immigration customs enforcement. And so Mennonite churches wanted to not only be able to host people in their church, but to protect them as well. So did nonviolent direct action trainings to be able to challenge policies as well as be prepared themselves to put their bodies on the line in support of the people that they were providing sanctuary for.
Thanks. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, put them directly in the Q&A so that we can make sure to get those specific questions towards the end of the webinar. And we do have Casey Detweiler, again, a co-star in the video series, watching Facebook Live. So if you do have questions there, she'll make sure to transfer them over.
So a little bit more about the series. We designed it both to introduce people to nonviolent direct action, some of the theory behind it, and its biblical grounding, as well as give people specific aspects of nonviolent direct action campaigns to increase familiarity with the concepts. So in video 6, we talk about tactics. In video 5, we talk about audience. In video 4, we talk about the various targets or interventions that you might choose. Video 7, we talk about what role you might want to play in a direct action. And video 8 that we watched talks about some of the strategies that you might use.
And so, yeah, some of our mentors who taught us what we know about direct action are here on the line. So I want to give a shout out to Carol Rose, former director of Christian Peacemaker Teams. And also in terms of like the roles in an action, I want to say hello to Chris Chubb and also give credit to our ancestor Gene Stoltzfus, who said a public witness or like a nonviolent direct action, when it's well organized, can be like a beautiful work of art. Even though these actions sometimes can feel chaotic and confusing, we are making an intervention to make space to allow for the really amazing power of the Holy Spirit. We have just come through Pentecost, and in some ways, what Pentecost was a type of nonviolent direct action. How? The faithful gathered together. They prayed for empowerment. They prayed to be given the way to show how what they had learned might influence people's lives and disrupt the power of the empire, the grip it had on people that made them just keep their head down and continue with business as usual. And so at a moment in Jerusalem where people were gathered celebrating the giving of the written word to the Hebrew people, the intervention that the disciples made was to speak in many languages empowered by the Holy Spirit, to communicate, make their own media, to make an intervention in the story, the narrative of what was happening in that place and time. And it had an impact. Their audience then was the people who were gathered, Jews from all over the world said, in Jerusalem for the holiday of Shavuot. And the people said, hey, I thought these were all like Galileans. How is it that we hear them all in our own language? And so their action was incredibly successful because many people then said, hey, I want to know more, and became a part of an affinity group, those disciples who were sharing their economic possessions, resisting violence through nonviolent life together, crossing class barriers, and creating a multi-ethnic community committed to the renewal that Jesus was pointing towards and the revolution that he embodied. And so in some ways, when you observe maybe a nonviolent direct action, you might think, oh, I don't necessarily see the gospel, but know that there are gospel roots and there are connections that will happen when you and your community put yourself out there to try to make an intervention in business as usual. And indeed, right now, just heard on the radio, we're at 421 parts per million in carbon in the air, and we need to bring it down to 350 at minimum. You know, so if not now, when? And if not y'all, like who? And we say this because we want to make this for our community, and there are other communities out there who are also doing this. So you're going to meet some fantastic people in your local community, and your affinity group, your congregation doesn't have to invent a campaign. They can be together with others on one. And this already, we have a question around what ideas can we do with regards to the present conflict in Ukraine? There's a lot of people mobilizing on this right now. What might be our role? So that's a question around roles. Would you like to speak to that now, or should we pause on that and keep going? What's your preference?
Let's speak to that now.
All right.
No.
You're right.
A few thoughts off the top of my head around Ukraine. First of all, our good friend, a Mennonite writer in Germany, Benny Krause, has written some really great things in Mennonite World about nonviolent responses to what's going on in Ukraine. I have had this question before, and I always want to start whenever I feel compelled about something anywhere in the world, is to ask, what are similar situations that I'm missing? Right? So it's very easy to see why Ukraine has gripped us so much. But the war in Yemen is happening right now with a lot of US backing, and millions of people are starving because of that. The occupation of Palestine is happening. The invasion and occupation of Palestine is happening because of the U.S. backing. And so there's many similar situations that we might be even closer to, that we can also feel that we have we might not feel that we have as close a role, but that we are very close to. So that would be the first part of my answer.
Because part of what makes a nonviolent direct action campaign possible and successful is when you yourself potentially are implicated in the problem and you are refusing to continue your implication. You are breaking with that business as usual. So that's why Jonathan is bringing up scenarios in which the United States is actually the aggressor, and we as US citizens can speak to that in a very powerful way that people around the world have asked us to do. At the same time, I think some of the mobilization that we have seen around Ukraine is showing that more of the population is understanding the importance of responding when there is war. And so I think right now, my suggestion is to do some education about why this is happening and to look at the history of imperialism. Because that is something that is touching Ukraine right now in a very potent way. And it's something that has really created the situation of why Russia is doing what it's doing. So I think getting really deep right now in our understanding, as well as continuing to contribute to the nonviolent movement and to aid to the people of Ukraine, to also changing refugee policy everywhere. There has been some willingness to think about refugees in a new way. Now that there are more light-skinned folks from Eastern Europe who are refugees, whereas people working on refugee policy for a long time have been trying to get traction and have not been able to because there's been a sense of we don't want a foreign other here. So thinking about how to make an intervention in refugee policy, though it may feel a step far from Ukraine, it is actually really deeply connected because we want to make sure that everyone has the safety they need.
And finally, it's always important when looking at any issue to ask, what are those committed to peace doing in that situation? So find the Ukrainian voices that are calling for peace and support them.
And they are there and they are calling. So we'll try to amplify their voices. Thank you for the question. Yeah, and this is what's coming to our hearts now. If we did a training with your community, we'd spend more time and we would debate these things and we would think about, in the end, kind of like sifting through what is ours to do? What is the piece of the puzzle that we can do? What is the little yeast mixed into the dough? I think about this gospel all the time when Jesus is like, the kingdom of God is like yeast that a woman mixed into 3 measures of flour. So it's the wrong recipe to make bread. There's like way too much flour. But the yeast, they just keep mixing. And she just keeps mixing and just keeps going and going and going until all the dough is leavened. So we're going to get in there with all the rest of the yeast and just do our thing and help to make this bread rise. So we are one piece of the puzzle. And when we connect with those who are most affected, follow their leadership, and do the work that is ours to do, no doubt some change will happen. I mean, it is possible also to just run into the streets and make your voice heard. Sometimes the swell of people generating a public response is totally necessary to initially disrupt business as usual.
However, being organized, as in having beautiful, meaningful action with a plan beforehand and care and debriefing afterwards, can sustain a movement in the long haul. When we end tonight, we're going to show you video 9, which has the example of Rosa Parks, which is often brought up as an example of a spontaneous action. But actually, if you know the history, she was a well-trained nonviolent activist.
So stay till the end. You can see video 9. Or just go to mennonitemission.net/stir. Stirring it up, right? Here we go.
Yeah, because we hope that this series that you watch with your congregation, with your community, with your affinity group, may lead you to joining a local or national campaign. Or it may lead you to having a training so that you can lead your own meaningful, sustainable, and risky prophetic action.
So from Facebook, they have a little bit more engagement here around this question of Ukraine and like how a town is divided about whether or not to accept people. And there's a recognition that the town was built by immigrants, and also this person knows several first-generation U.S. Americans, and is looking at how quickly people forget. So one of the powerful days that sometimes is used are holidays. And holidays are important because they're already carrying cultural significance. So, for example, Memorial Day, memorial, memory. What might it be like for next year, Memorial Day? You have almost a year to plan. So think about not what is generally remembered on Memorial Day, which is a glorification of war, but what memories do our places carry? What have we forgotten that we need to remember? And so you can make an intervention on like Memorial Day or something like that. That's one way, because how quickly we forget. I feel like that can lead you down a path of thinking, where are places where people are trying to remember, where we can remember what our history actually is, so that when people are spewing lies about not being able to have enough space for all, that we can be creative, because there's a history of making space before. And, there's a lot of beautiful work that can be done on that in connection also with Indigenous people, who are peoples who have long memories of particular places and time. And so perhaps that sentence and that sentiment can lead you on.
We also had a question in the Q&A about who are our Mennonite representatives in Washington, D.C. And I want to say that there are moments in direct action campaigns when engaging those in positions of power is important. And it's often helpful, I have found, to find people that already have connections in those spaces. And so, for example, Mennonite Central Committee has an office in DC that works on legislative issues. So if you're looking for a Mennonite representation in Washington, DC, I would point you towards the MCC DC office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of the question related to like Mennonite elected officials, are they holding to their Mennonite values? I mean, this is something we can debate. So I think that it's worth, if they have stated values, right, then you can approach them at the point of decision and say, these are your stated values. This is what's happening in reality. Help us understand the gap. Oh, and by the way, we will stay here and sit in your office until you help us understand this gap, or until you're willing to meet with members of your community who you say are important to you. So you want to pick a point of leverage, and you want to pick like a type of tactic that will assist you in meeting as many of your goals as possible. Again, these are the things that we talk about in a training, and these videos are to help people come up to speed so that they can be to the point of training. Yeah.
So there are many Mennonite churches that are already doing actions, and Christians worldwide that are already out there on the streets. So your group doesn't have to necessarily invent a campaign. You can train up just to join one in your local area. Social movements for positive change are always looking for more people. People are the ones that power those movements. So the more you can be involved, the better. So even if you're not a movement veteran, if you arrive with some knowledge of the history and goals, and you arrive with the resources of faith and discipline, you will be an asset to the movement. And so we hope that this series assists you in having the basics so that you can take those next steps.
And hopefully in the future, we can do more of this in person. with masks, of course, we need to, and outside. Yeah, right now it's a webinar. You can only see us and the hosts. But yeah, we can do some training online, especially for the purposes of deciding what might be your campaign. And we can do those in Zoom meeting format and stuff. So there's a lot of different options. Yeah. Any other questions? Just leave some space for that. Just go to the Q&A box in the middle. Or any other thoughts that you'd like to put in the chat. Great.
Well, we have just a few minutes left, so we're going to move into our closing.
And you can follow up with us. We're just going to type our email here. And you can also be in touch with MMN folks to get more information. We know that some of you on here have already been using this Stir Up Peace video series in your congregations, and it's been generating some good conversations. So thank you for sharing your reflections with us and for your willingness to try this for your religious education or Sunday school time. We certainly had a lot of fun working together with the team to make these videos, and we really hope that they do support you. Cool.
We promised that we would show video 9, so we will close with that. Beforehand, we're going to invite Joni Miller up to give a closing prayer. But I think Sarah would like to respond to Jill's question very briefly before we go into that.
Sometimes it's hard to convince people. Jill writes that NVDA makes any sense. Any suggestions? I mean, just send them the video series link and tell them to watch it. See what they think. There is a great book written that is called How We Win by George Lakey. I'm looking over at our bookshelf here, as well as Maria Stephan and Erica Chenoweth have written a book about civil resistance and why it works and how powerful it is. The data shows that throughout history, nonviolent direct actions are twice as likely to be able to achieve their goals and build a society that people want to live in after the aftermath of large societal conflict. If, one of the main movements that was helping to generate change was committed to nonviolent direct action, principled or strategic. And so convincing people may or may not be worth your time, but living in the joy of the Lord out there with your sign that says no war, peace for all, or whatever your campaign is, and letting your life speak and your commitment show, I think has a really strong track record. I think we would not be sitting here today without the many people in this community and more broadly who showed us with their lives why this matters. And so we're here not because we were convinced, but because we saw, and because we want to emulate how we saw the spirit of life working through them. So once again, here's the whole series. And for the last word, over to Joni.
Thank you so much, Jonathan and Sarah. It's been a great last hour. When I was listening to this and thinking about it, how our brains so automatically go into either the fight or flight or freeze mode. And that with these kinds of issues, it's so easy to go into that freeze place and feel like there's no way out from that. And what you've done with this series and with this webinar tonight has given us some real tangible ways to move from that. And that's what it takes, is the tangible ways to begin to think about how we can actually make a difference. So thank you on behalf of MMN. We thank you for creating the series and for being with us tonight on this webinar. And then also for the continued work that you're doing in this. So thank you. And let's all pray together. Would you join me? Lord, Creator, our hearts break with the pain of this world, and we thirst for justice. We know that you are our true source of peace. Tonight, we acknowledge that in your holiness, you are mightier than any weapon or any act of violence, and we thank you. Lord, Sarah and Jonathan have given us much to consider tonight. Please, we need your Spirit. We need you to guide us. Hear our shared prayer, Lord, and give us strength to attend to the harm in the world, to expose, to disrupt, to be involved and organized, to be bold enough to break our implication, to face hard work, to be annoying, to see what is ours to do to make positive change. Oh, Spirit, come rest on us. Keep us aware, open to learning and ready for action. Dwell in us as we stir up peace. We welcome your reign of peace here on earth as it is in heaven. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, and see you in the struggle.
The time had just come when I had been pushed as far as I could stand to be pushed, I suppose.
We live in extraordinary times. The global community is more connected than ever. That connection has led to deeper understanding and unity among individuals and nations. But just as often, close connections are seen as a threat by those who do not like diversity. Fear-mongering against connection has led to increased war, injustice, and repression. The feeling that everything is falling apart can be overwhelming. It's tempting to look away from the pain. So how do we respond to the violence we see in our neighborhoods around the world? We won't end violence just by telling people not to use violence. Telling people to be peaceful, but not attending to the harm they have experienced, is careless. Nonviolence means being involved in the hard work of making positive change. It's not a matter of advising from a comfortable position. Historical peace church groups like the Mennonites have tried to provide alternatives to violence. They build institutions and programs that offer ways to live in the world without causing harm. Building alternatives continues to be an important way to live peacefully. A community garden creates food self-sufficiency in neighborhoods. Church communities care for its members in spiritual and emotional ways that encourage generosity rather than greed. But building alternatives is only one element of peacemaking. Our peace witness calls us to disrupt the harm that our society heaps on our neighbors at home and around the world. With the love of Jesus in your heart, know that you stand in a long line of people called to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Rosa Parks was a seamstress who is most famous for refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama bus. This act did not happen spontaneously. Parks had a lot of training before she decided to remain seated that day. Since the 1940s, she had been working with others to address injustices, including confronting the sexual violence facing Black women and girls. God may be calling you to take action too. Let's make sure you're well equipped to answer the call, so that when you're under pressure, you can look as calm and collected as Rosa Parks. If you're ready to go deeper with nonviolent direct action, find an in-person training. There are a number of groups ready to support your community's continued learning. Jesus' first sermon was, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because the Most High has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. God has sent me to proclaim release to the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." As disciples, we believe that the same Spirit is with us. It calls us to engagement with the world. It calls us to seek peace for all people.